What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving my recap, reaction, and review of the second episode of the Paramount Plus drama series, Landman. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching this episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So even though I've come to expect, Taylor Sheridan to make really good content, I still have to say that I was impressed, thoroughly impressed, in fact, with the first episode of this show. And I know it's still really early, but I already think this is going to be one of Sheridan's best efforts. I find the premise to be unique and compound in nature. I always tell you guys a compound premise is much better than a basic premise. And, kind of like Sons of Anarchy did for me way back in the day, this show is introducing me to a world I don't know very much about. Which is always kind of cool in my book. It always kind of draws me in even more if I feel like this is a kind of show that I probably haven't seen before. And so that's kind of the feeling that I get when I think about this television show. And as it pertains to moving forward, I'm looking to see how this show builds off of a strong first episode, and it kind of sets the pace for the remainder of the season. Now, Episode 2, entitled Dreamers and Losers, starts in the immediate aftermath of the oil rig explosion. And we see Cooper gathering himself, and he realizes what's happened, right? Still in shock, but he's kind of like wrapping his mind around what actually just went down. And he manages to make his way into the cab of the damaged truck nearby, and he makes a phone call. Roll opening credits. Now, from there, we go to the oil house to find Tommy in the kitchen making coffee. Straight black, no cream, no sugar. With Nathan in the dining room on his laptop as he eats a Pop-Tart. And Tommy tells Nathan that he needs to stop eating junk, essentially. Nathan remarks that, Tommy smokes. And Tommy asks Nathan if he's ever been to Japan. Now, he tells him that the whole country smokes, that it's the same in Italy and in China, and that those countries lung cancer, and in those countries, lung cancer isn't even the top 10 cause of death. And that it's not smoking that will kill a man, it's eating sugar and processed foods that will. Now, at that moment, Ainsley enters the room wearing only her crop top hoodie and her underwear. Goodness gracious. And she hugs Tommy and says, "Good morning, Daddy." Now, Nathan looks shocked and he asks if the young lady is using Daddy as a metaphor. And Tommy explains that she is his actual daughter. And Nathan takes one more look at her as she walks out of the room before he replies, "Now I know why you smoke so much." Now in the living room, Ainsley comes across the pillow and blankets that she gave Dakota the night before, folded neatly on the couch, and she starts to become emotional. She walks back into the dining room and explains to her dad that Dakota left. And, Tommy reminds her, "Well, honey, that's what you told him to do." She explains that he wasn't supposed to do what she told him. Instead, he was supposed to change the way he felt and then do what she ultimately wanted him to do. And then she yells out, "What the fuck is wrong with men?" before storming out of the room. Now, in light of the situation, Tommy lights a cigarette, claiming that he knows they have a rule about smoking inside the house, but Nathan explains that he understands. And at that moment, Dale enters the house wearing dirty coveralls. Now, Tommy asks, "I thought your hitch was over. Remember, he was supposed to be leaving last episode." But Dale explains that someone called in a lightning strike on a holding tank just as he was leaving town, as he makes himself a drink. Now, Tommy asks if he might want to have coffee instead, and Dale explains that if he has a cup of coffee, his heart will explode. Dale then walks upstairs as Tommy tries to stop him before he does, but he says, "Hey, don't walk on the carpet with those dirty boots on," but it's already too late. He's already done so, headed up the stairs. Now, Dale enters the bedroom and begins to undress. He then walks into the bathroom and gets into the shower, even though the shower was already on before he got to the bathroom. That's weird. He must not have been in his right mind, because you'd be thinking, well, why is the shower running? Everybody I know is downstairs. But he gets in the shower and he finds Ainsley already in there. Now she screams, punching Dale in the face before streaking through the house and screaming that there's an R-word person in the bathroom. Now, Tommy finds Dale sitting on the bathroom floor, still naked. He's got a towel covering himself with a black eye. And Dale asks him how come he didn't tell him that he had a woman over. Tommy explains that he doesn't have a woman over, that he has his daughter over. Now, Dale explains that his daughter is a woman, and Tommy threatens to hit him again. He then offers Dale an aspirin. Dale asks how long Ainsley will be staying with them. Tommy says a couple of days. Dale asks Tommy to explain that she needs to lock the bathroom door when she's in it, and Tommy agrees to explain that to her. Now downstairs, we see Ainsley sitting at the table in a robe, staring at my man Nathan. And Tommy enters the room and he introduces Nathan. Says that he's the oil company lawyer. He then explains to her who Dale is and that everyone needs to lock the bathroom doors when they're in it. Now at that point, Tommy gets a call, and we see Sheriff Joburg speeding towards the oil rig explosion on the other end of Tommy's call, and he tells him about it. Now Tommy, hearing this news, immediately looks worried, and he hangs up the phone. And the next thing we see is Tommy speeding towards the oil rig. Now from there, we get another nice-sized home, and we see a woman swimming in the pool. Now inside the house, we see a woman dressed in professional attire walking towards a porch or a balcony of some kind, in the house, where we find Monty Miller on the phone trying to make a business deal. Now the professionally dressed woman puts a newspaper and some other documents down on the table, and then she leaves. And Monty ends the first call, but he gets another call, and it's Tommy. And he tells Tommy that Shepard Hastings is sending an attorney out and asks if he can pick them up. Tommy then explains that there's been a blowout. Monty asks if there were any crew on site. Tommy explains that he doesn't know yet, but that he's en route and that he, should tell the attorney to get a rental car. Monty then asks if there's room at the house or if the attorney will need a hotel. Now, Tommy explains that there's room at the house. I mean, is there? but keep that in mind. Now, Monty tells Tommy that that Tommy to let him know what he finds out more about the oil rig explosion. Monty hangs up the phone and then walks out to the pool to meet his wife, Cammie, played by Demi Moore. Now, next, Tommy arrives at the oil rig and he finds Walt. And he asks if there's an oil man around. And Sheriff Joburg says, yes, there's a man down with EMS. Tommy then asks if he's seen anyone shutting off valves. And Sheriff Joburg says no. Tommy then explains that if he thinks the current situation is bad, that if the holding tank goes up, they'll blow his ass to Abilene. Tommy then finds the ambulance and discovers that the injured oil man is his son. He asks first if he's all right, and then he asks where the rest of the crew are. And Cooper seems out of it. The medic explained that he has a busted eardrum. Tommy then asks if the valves have been turned off, and Cooper responds, I don't know. So Tommy goes to his truck and he grabs some turnout gear and a wrench. And he tells Sheriff Joburg to get everybody back, and he attempts to turn off the valve, injuring his hand in the process. But he does get the valve turned off as the fire department work to put the fire out. And the ambulance carrying his son heads to the hospital. Now, Sheriff Joburg approaches, sees his hand, and offers to stop the ambulance. Tommy tells him not to just get him a cigarette and a Dr. Pepper. And so, he does. He apparently had some in a cooler somewhere. So Tommy sits in the back of his truck and he has a cigarette and he drinks a soda. That's interesting, right? He then takes out his phone and he calls in extra fire support to help put out the fire. Now, after he finishes his soda, he tells Sheriff Joburg that now he will go to the hospital. He gets in his truck and he drives away. Now, from there, we see a PJ landing at the airport in Odessa. And a woman dressed in a professional attire gets off and she walks into the airport. She asks for the rental car that was arranged for her, and the flight attendant explains that it's on the tarmac. She hands her a set of keys and she walks outside, pressing unlock until the vehicle beeps. Now, unsatisfied with the choice of vehicle, she goes back inside and asks for something more unassuming. The flight attendant explains that the vehicle won't stand out in Midland, but that she maybe shouldn't drive it in Odessa. Keep that in mind as well. Now, at that point, the woman replies, good to know, and she exits the airport. Now, from there, we see Tommy at the hospital, sitting on the gurney, on his phone. He FaceTime calls Angela, and she immediately asks if Ainsley is behaving. Tommy asks that if she knew that Ainsley and Dakota were having sex. Now, Angela explains that she assumed they were, insinuating that Dakota is hot, before remarking that if they ever broke up, that she might try to F him. These characters, boy. Now, Tommy explains that if that's something that she wants, it is her lucky day. And Angela seems disappointed for Ainsley, asking how she's taking it. And Tommy replies, like a girl who hasn't heard no since she was 8. And Angela chuckles. Now, Tommy then explains that there was an accident in one of the rigs and that Cooper was hurt. And Angela asks how hurt. Tommy explains that they're at the ER and he's getting checked out. Angela asks to speak to him, and Tommy explains that he's in another room, and then Angela starts fussing and asking why he isn't with him. Now Tommy holds up his bloody finger to the phone, and Angela remarks that he always has to make something about him. She asks where Ainsley is, and Tommy explains that she's at the house. Now Angela doesn't like that she's there alone with a bunch of petroleum engineers hopped up on Cialis. Tommy explains that as soon as he hears about Cooper that he'll call her back. Angela remarks that she's not done with him, but Tommy explains that they're divorced so he doesn't have to deal with her shit anymore before saying, enjoy the beach, your tits looks great, don't get syphilis. That was a line of the episode for me. And then he hangs up. Now the doctor then comes in and takes a look at his hand, and he decides that he wants to call in a hand specialist to reattach his pinky finger because he hit himself in the pinky with the hammer and literally knocked his finger off. It's dangling. But Tommy doesn't have time for that, and he tells the doctor to cut off the tip and sew up the hole. The doctor explains that he's not a surgeon. Tommy explains that there's a surgeon right here and at that point he takes a nearby scalpel and he cuts the tip of his own pinky finger off as the doctor watches in horror. He then asks the doctor if he cares to stitch it up. The doctor doesn't answer, and Tommy asks if he just got out of school before asking what the chances are that the finger would simply scab over in a month and be good as new. The doctor explains to him that the chances of that are extremely remote, that what's more likely to happen is that he'll get a staph infection, and a month later, they would need to amputate his arm, and that he would get a nurse to prepare a suture. Tommy then asks what room Cooper is in, and the doctor tells him. He explains he's going to see his son and that he can just find him when he's ready. The doctor convinces Tommy to at least cover his hand before he leaves the room, and Tommy agrees. Now, from there, we're back at the oil rig, and we see the remains of the rest of the crew, or at least one of them. And we see Sheriff Joburg making a call. Now, Tommy answers said call and asks if he's found them, meaning the rest of the crew. Sheriff Joburg claims that he found one of them. When Tommy asks which one, Sheriff Joburg remarks that there's no way to know. He asks Tommy if he wants to come with him to notify the next of kin, and Tommy replies, not really. Sheriff Joburg then asks if he'll come anyway, and Tommy tells him to pick him up at the hospital. So next, we see Tommy enter Cooper's hospital room. Now, Cooper asks his dad what happened to his hand. He tells him that he hit it with a hammer. Tommy then asks Cooper what happened at the rig. Cooper explains that he was sent to get a pipe wrench, and the next thing he knew, he was flying through the air. And that, just like that, there were 3 widows and 6 orphans. Now, Tommy corrects him, stating that there are 8 orphans. He explains that that's reason number 1 why he might want to find a better way to make a living. Cooper asks if he's supposed to sit in an office and sell computer chips. And Tommy replies, maybe. You know what I'm going to do after they sew up what's left of my finger? I'm going to drive over to Luis's house, and I'm going to tell his wife that she's lost a husband and 2 nephews. And then I'm going to go over to Armando's house and do the same kind of thing. And then I'm going to go out to Elvio's house and tell a 22-year-old mother to break out the fucking want ads and get a job. No time to grieve, no time to mourn, because banks don't wait. You might want to look at the want ads yourself, you selfish little son of a bitch, before I'm having the same conversation with your mother as I'm about to have with Elvio's wife. And then he gets up to leave the room. But as he's leaving, Cooper remarks, if I'm so selfish, what does that make you? Keep that in mind. Tommy turns at the door and replies, a divorced alcoholic with $500,000 in debt, and I'm one of the lucky ones. And then he turns again and finally leaves the room. Now from there we go to TCU for a track and field event, and we see Cammie Milton watching her daughter Gracie with her other daughter at a track meet. Now Monty is there too, but he's up, deeper up in the stands on the phone with Tommy discussing the accident. He asked Tommy if the dead crewmen were independent contractors, and he says no, they were one of ours. He then asked Tommy what happened, and he tells him that the rig had a pretty old jack and that one of the tank valves was rusted shut, and that he assumes it's the same with all the others. He goes on to say that one of the men must have banged it with a wrench that it created a spark, igniting the gas leak. Now as the race starts, Cammie calls out to Monty to come to the front so he can see. Monty asks Tommy what he wants to do, and Tommy says he wants to give each of the families $250K. He then puts Tommy on hold and comes to the front so he can watch his daughter run the 400-meter race. Now, as the race commences, Tommy is standing outside the hospital and he lights a cigarette. Now, Gracie wins the race to her mom's delight, just as Pete, a police officer standing outside the hospital, tells Tommy that he can't smoke there and that he needs to put out the cigarette. And the pair engage in an argument about it, with the officer telling him to put the phone down eventually. Now, once the race is done, Monty puts the phone back to his ear and he tells Tommy to give the families the money. Now, back at the hospital, the officer tells Tommy to turn around and face him before Tommy finally hangs up the phone just as Sheriff Joburg arrives. The sheriff asks the officer if Tommy is giving him trouble, and Officer Pete states that Tommy has a mouth on him. And Tommy mentions to Officer Pete that his mouth is his wife's favorite thing about him other than his penis. And then he flips him the bird and sarcastically tells him to have a nice day, just as Sheriff Joburg drives away. This guy. Now, meanwhile, back at the track, Cammie and Monty's other daughter meet Gracie on the track, and the family shares a hug in celebration as Monty remains in the bleachers, clearly worried about what's going on in the patch. Now, as Sheriff Joburg and Tommy head towards the family's houses, the sheriff explains to Tommy that telling local PD to go F themselves is short-sighted. Tommy explains that he needed to give it to somebody and that he was just the closest one. Sheriff Joburg then recommends that Tommy make amends by buying Pete, Officer Pete, a beer the first chance he gets, citing that he has a mean memory. Tommy then takes out his phone and he calls Norman back at the house. Now, Norman answers the phone, still seated at the dining room table, and we can see Ainsley tanning in a bikini in the backyard by the pool. Now, Tommy asks what Ainsley's doing, and Norman explains that she's napalming his concentration and that she's discovered the pool. Tommy asks if he can manage, enough self-control not to gawk, and Norman explains that he's facing away from the window. He then tells Norman that Monty cleared them to make bereavement payments to the family. Norman asks how much, and Tommy tells him $250 each. Norman asks for the names and the next of kin and that he'll forward them to accounting. But Tommy explains to Norman that he knows the names, that the Marina family was servicing the well and that it exploded. He asks which one of them died, and Tommy replies, they all died. And then he ends the call. Now, at that point, Norman, affected by the news, he gets a beer out of the refrigerator, and when he closes the door, Ainsley is standing there asking for coconut oil. He tells her to check in the pantry, and he watches as she reaches for the top shelf in her bikini, and she eventually pulls down a Crisco, or something, just like Crisco, explaining that it's not what she was looking for, but that it'll do. And then she takes the Crisco and goes back outside. And curious about what she plans to do with the Crisco, Norman goes to the window and he watches as she slathers the substance all over her body like it's sunscreen, and then he decides to go work in the other room. Now, from there, we see Sheriff Joburg and Tommy arrive at the Medina home. They see what looks like the entire family outside of the home, and the sheriff asks Tommy if the family knows the news of their family members is coming, and Tommy explains that they know something is coming, but not exactly what. The men then get out of the truck and they approach Louise's wife, and she's asked simply, which one? Tommy asks if Pariah and Ariana are both there as well, and then he asks if they can come inside. She accompanies the men inside and closes the front door before we hear a loud moan followed by profuse crying, and all the women who are sitting outside the front door get up and walk into the house. Now, next we see Tommy at the Patch Cafe drinking a beer. The bartender approaches and he asks if he's sticking with beer or if he wants something stronger. Tommy explains that he quit drinking so that he'll stick with beer. And the bartender kind of smartly explains that there's alcohol in the beer he's drinking. But Tommy explains that it's a Michelob Ultra and that there's more alcohol in orange juice. The bartender explains that he's not judging, that he's been on the wagon for 8 years, but that drinking beer is still drinking. Tommy tells him that he should watch him drink 6 Michelobs and then watch him come back tomorrow and drink 6 whiskeys and see if he can tell the difference. The bartender tells Tommy that he'll just take his word for it, and he gets him another Michelob Ultra. Now, at that moment, he gets a FaceTime call from Angela complaining that Tommy didn't call her back, about Cooper. Tommy apologizes before explaining that Cooper is alert and awake, but that they're going to keep him overnight. She then asks about his little boo-boo. He explains that it's an inch shorter than it was earlier. Angela makes a joke about that summing up their marriage. Tommy then retorts that he still has a few inches on that fat-ass ATM she married. So I guess, Victor, who we haven't seen, is rich and also fat. And maybe has a small penis, I don't know. Anyway, Angela remarks that every comma in a man's bank account adds 2 inches to his penis, and then she tells Tommy that he's way behind. She then tells Tommy that she feels like she should be there before asking if she should be there. Tommy explains that she should feel guilty. She remarks that she deserves a vacation, but Tommy explains that she's doing the very same thing she does at home, except she just can't drink the water. She asks if he's saying that she should come. He tells her that she doesn't need to, but that she's their mother, and if she feels like she should be there, then she should come. She then asks if he wants her to come. He tells her that he couldn't care less if she came or not. She then states that sentence is what sums up their marriages before explaining that she'll see him tomorrow. So I guess she's coming. Now, after he hangs up with Angela, he gets a call from Rebecca Falcone from Shepherd Hastings Law Firm. He explains that they have a room for her at the house before she cuts him off, explaining that she got a hotel. She then asks if they can meet over the weekend. He explains that they can meet right now if she wants. She asks where, and he tells her the Patch Cafe. She asks how far it is from the Hilton, and he explains that every place in Midland is 15 minutes from everything else, and she agrees to meet him there. Now, Rebecca pulls up to the Patch Cafe in a Mercedes, and she gets out of the car still wearing her delectable pantsuit. And she walks past a bunch of, oil men standing outside, and she enters the cafe, walking up to the hostess, and she asks for Tommy. And the hostess replies, "Cowboy hat at the bar." Now, she looks around, and of course, everybody's wearing a cowboy hat. But as she approaches the bar, Tommy spots her and motions for her to come over. She asks if she's that easy to spot, and Tommy explains that it wasn't difficult before asking if she wants a drink. She asks for a club soda, and Tommy says to the bartender, "Club soda for the lady." The bartender explains that a club soda is a non-alcoholic drink, and then Tommy threatens his tip. Now, Rebecca asks Tommy not to refer to her as a lady. He apologizes and calls her sir in response, essentially claiming that she must be trans. Rebecca then claims that her first day in the oil fields was not a disappointment, that it's as offensive as she imagined it would be. Tommy then remarks that the people Rebecca works for are soulless, that they represented the bin Laden family, that they should be thanking him for calling her a lady because she'll never hear it again, likely in her line of work. Now, after the pair stare at each other in an awkward silence, Tommy apologizes, claiming that he lost 3 friends and a finger and that he's a little edgy. Rebecca remarks that she didn't know they were friends, and Tommy reiterates that they were. Rebecca apologizes before explaining that they need to shift their focus from the TTP incident, that being the truck that crashed into the PJ in last episode, to the explosion, that it lends itself to more exposure. Tommy replies, "Well, you're the lawyer." Rebecca then asks to be taken to the incident site the next day, but Tommy offers to take her now, and she agrees. Now, Tommy pays the bill, and the bartender asks if he wants his change, and he says, "I can't believe you said that with a straight face. Of course I want my effing change." Now, from there, the pair go out to the site of the incident, and Rebecca asks him who, besides the insurance companies and the county sheriffs, investigates the sites. Tommy tells her that OSHA, the Railroad Commission, DPS, and then he asks her why she doesn't know all that, seeing as how she's litigating a liability case. She explains that her specialty is chain of liability, which applies to the TTP case. She goes on to explain that the explosion happened, while she was on the plane, and Tommy explains that maybe they should send another attorney. Rebecca inquires about the survivor, asking if she can speak to him, and Tommy tells her no, not today. She asks when, and Tommy explains that she can talk to him when he gets out of the hospital. She asks Tommy what he can tell from the look of the rig, and he tells her that he can't tell anything, but that from the fire he could tell that there was a leak, that a roughneck created a spark when he tried to open a valve with a hammer and a wrench. And Rebecca remarks that doesn't seem safe, and Tommy explains, well, no, it's not safe. That's why they make $180,000 a year. Rebecca remarks that that's not enough money to make a person risk their life, and Tommy replies, "For you, maybe. For a felon with an 8th grade education, it's an effing lottery ticket." Now, Rebecca replies, "And for an oil company whose manager knowingly sends his employees to a faulty well that violates OSHA standards, it's a 9-figure lawsuit." Tommy replies, "Well, then the whole goddamn industry is guilty." After an awkward silence, Rebecca explains to Tommy that she's on his side, that he needs to understand that. And Tommy explains that he understands plenty and that she's the furthest thing from on his side, and then he gets in the truck and drives away, leaving her standing there. Now, from there, we go to a banquet being held at a hotel, and we see Cammy and Monty eating as a speaker stands on a podium talking about the oil and gas industry. Now, Cammy seems unimpressed and uninterested, stating that they're supposed to be on a date. Monty explains that this is just the beginning of the date and that the date will get fun later. He gets a call from Tommy and he excuses himself to take said call. Monty walks downstairs to a room near the lobby, and when he calls Tommy back, he and Tommy get into it about the lawyer as Tommy continues his drive, with Tommy claiming that the lawyer is there to hang him out to dry, that he doesn't have a well that can pass an OSHA standards. He explains angrily that he's a lot of things, but he's not a patsy. Monty explains that he called Clay, that Clay said he was flying to him, that he doesn't know who they sent instead, but that he'll find out. He goes on to remind Tommy that their business is one of constant crisis interrupted by brief periods of intense success, and that he should know that better than anyone. He then tells Tommy that he knows that today was rough, that he understands why he might be feeling a bit emotional, but that he shouldn't let his emotions confuse him as to who the boss is, that the boss is him and that he'd better not ever raise his voice at him again, and then he hangs up the phone angrily as Tommy continues to drive, also angrily. Now at that point, Tommy gets a call from Ainsley, and he explains that he's on the way home, but Ainsley insists that she's starving. He explains that there's food in the cupboard, but Ainsley remarks that stuff is all processed cancer bombs. They're steadily talking about the food and all that kind of stuff in this show, right? About how it's going to give you cancer and stuff. She claims she needs protein and that Vienna sausages is not protein. Tommy asks if she wants him to pick her up something, and she asks for an animal-style Whataburger wrapped in lettuce. He asks how they can wrap a burger in lettuce, that their lettuce is shredded. And Ainsley claims that they always do it when she asks, that they go in the back and they get a whole lettuce. Now, Tommy chuckles, explaining that they live in two different worlds, that they'll tell him to go F himself if he asks them for that. But she agrees and then asks for 3 fries and a Diet Coke to go along with the burger. Tommy laughs at the thought that Ainsley refuses to eat burger buns but will eat 3 orders of fries. Ainsley then explains that she only wants 3 fries, not 3 orders, and that she wants him to throw the rest of the fries out. Now, he begrudgingly agrees, and he asks if she needs anything else, and Ainsley thanks him and asks if he's close. He tells her no, that he's maybe an hour from getting home. Ainsley remarks that she hopes he's still alive when he gets there, and Tommy explains that these are the challenges that will harden her for life's tragedies and that he'll see her soon. She pouts for a bit, and then she thanks him again and tells him that she loves him before hanging up. And as soon as she hangs up, Angela FaceTime calls again and asks where he's headed. He tells her that he's going to the strip club, and she asks if he's doing that while their daughter's there. Tommy claims that Ainsley is meeting him there, that he thought she needed to see the darker side of life. She then asks where he's really headed, and he tells her that he's going home. She tells him that he looks tired, and he remarks that there's a reason for that. She explains to him that she doesn't really need to come there before asking again if she should come. Tommy tells her that he already told her that she doesn't need to come. She then asks what if she wanted to come. Tommy asks her why would she want to leave Cabo to come to Midland and have sex with her ex-husband in a rental house with 3 roommates. And she asks, can't you just effing want me to come? Why can't you do that? He explains that he does want her to come, but that he knows she'll never do it, and that always breaks his heart. Angela then claims that he'll think about it later. And Tommy explains that since he's currently sharing a bed with their daughter, that he hopes he doesn't. Remember that, right? Angela tells him that she'll call him tomorrow, and the pair say their goodbyes. Now, from there, Tommy arrives home with Ainsley's food, and the pair sit at the dining room table. She opens the bag and finds a full order of fries. Now, she complains about it before telling Tommy, before Tommy tells her that the rest of the fries are going to be for him. But she makes him throw them out anyway. I don't know why, but okay. Tommy throws out the fries, remarking that her behavior was cute when she was 8, but that now all he can think about is her first marriage and how her husband is going to leave skid marks in the driveway after he's had a few years of her shit. Ainsley remarks that her behavior annoys him because he's her dad and he doesn't want to have sex with her, but that other boys look at the chores she gives them like little treasure hunts. Tommy then explains to Ainsley that Cooper's in the hospital, and he apologizes for forgetting to tell her sooner. He tells her that he's in Midland and that he dropped out of school to work at the patch. Ainsley remarks that Cooper's a loser, and Tommy looks at her with disdain, disappointment maybe is a better word. Probably because if she thinks Cooper's a loser, then she has to think the same about him. But she notices his stare and immediately explains that she didn't mean it. He explains to Ainsley that there are 2 types of people that work in the patch, dreamers and losers, and that America used to be a country of dreamers and losers, that failures will come out west to either die or succeed, but that there aren't any dreamers anymore, just thieves and fools. He tells her that Midland is where dreamers come now, and that losers come there to win. And he asks her which one she's going to be. And she replies, a dreamer. Now keep that in mind. Tommy explains that a person's first attempt is almost always going to be a failure. And that means that she's going to be a loser too, and that he wonders what she'll do then. He then tells her to take his room for the night and that he'll take the couch, and he gets up and leaves the room. He's taking the couch because of what, Angela said about him thinking about her later. She's put that in his head, so he don't want to sleep in the same bed with his daughter because he don't want his daughter to wake up feeling a boner from her dad, and I approve. I understand why you would make that decision, right? So the next morning, we see Cooper being wheeled out of the hospital, and his dad is waiting for him at the front door. He gets into the truck, and they head down the highway. He explains to Cooper that now he should understand that roughnecking is dangerous. Cooper remarks to his father that he smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Tommy explains that in 3 months he could have had a college degree in geology, and Cooper explains that he doesn't need a degree, that he learned all he needs to know about geology, but that he doesn't want to teach it, he wants to live it, that he wants to be a landman, like father, like son. Tommy explains that for every Monty Miller, that there's 100 of him. And Cooper then remarks to his dad that the only difference between him and Monty is that Monty didn't quit. And Tommy violently pulls the truck over to the side of the road, and he explains to Cooper that the difference between him and Monty is that he doesn't have a trust fund, that he didn't quit, that he bled out, that he doesn't see him speculating or banging on doors or hustling mineral rights, that he's the worm on a drill crew, that, he was, but that his whole crew died on his first day, so he should take the effing hint. Cooper explains that if he's going to run an oil company one day, that he needs to know how every aspect of it works. Tommy asks if that's his real plan. Cooper explains that that's his dream, that he doesn't quite have a plan yet. Tommy then thinks and explains that he's closer than most. Cooper then asks his dad if he'll do him a favor, and Tommy explains that it depends on what it is. Cooper asks him to give him another crew. Tommy just looks at him and explains that a lot of people are going to blame him for what happened, that anytime something goes wrong on an oil crew, they always blame the worm. But eventually he agrees to find Cooper another crew. He then tells Cooper that Ainsley is in town and asks if he wants to run by the house to see her. Cooper claims that he'd rather go back to the hospital and get another catheter shoved up his penis, and the pair share a laugh, man to man, you know what I mean? He then asks Cooper if he wants to go to the cafe for a beer. Cooper remarks that it's 8 a.m. Tommy remarks that it's Sunday before asking what else you got to do. So I guess maybe the drill crews have Sundays off. I mean, it is Texas, so maybe that's church day, right? Cooper chuckles and replies, why not? Tommy starts the truck and makes a U-turn on the highway, headed back towards the Midland city limits. Cut to black. So look, the first thing I'll say is that this episode was not as tight as the pilot was, and that's not a diss, as that's usually the case. Mostly because sometimes you have forever to write a pilot, especially if you're doing it on spec. But very rarely will you have the same amount of time to write the episodes that come after. Right, so you got to write faster. That's less time to go back and do rewrites and kind of really take a look at your dialogue and things like that and kind of see where you would want to make changes. Now, I thought the opening image in this episode was another strong one, with the episode starting in the immediate aftermath of the explosion from last episode that killed Cooper's first crew. I thought that was a good choice both visually and narratively, and wherein the last episode focused on the dangers of the oil industry, what this episode focused on was the cost of being associated with said industry, right? The price that is sometimes paid by those who aren't even oil men, but who are the wives and children of oil men. I mean, Cooper's crew, they're all dead. And my man Tommy lost a pinky finger, right? So, and of course, Rebecca claimed that 180 grand a year isn't enough to get somebody to risk their life. So we really got a chance to see the cost of being associated with the oil and gas industry. Now, I thought this episode was maybe 10 minutes longer than it needed to be, with a runtime of about 55 minutes. And part of the reason for that was that there were some unnecessary scenes in this one. Primarily the whole set of scenes with Dale and Ainsley. I thought that was a little overkill, especially with her talking about there's an R-word person in the house, in the bathroom, all that kind of stuff was just overkill, especially since we didn't see Dale again after those scenes were over. I mean, look, we get it. Ainsley is pretty hot, and she's surrounded by old men who all seem to think so, and don't even have a problem telling her dad that they think so. That's the crazy part. But there were like 4 or 5 scenes in the episode that all seemed to have the sole purpose of reiterating that fact. So with that in mind, I don't think we needed those couple of scenes with Dale in them. Now, I thought Tommy drinking a Dr. Pepper at the scene of the accident after getting on Norman about eating a Pop-Tart was absolutely diabolical work by the writers, right? Especially when he could have just not had a Dr. Pepper and stuck with a good old trusty cigarette, right? He's probably smoked 20 cigarettes in the past 2 episodes. And I think that would have just worked a little better because I think you don't want to get to the point where you start to have your characters contradicting themselves, right? It's a small thing, but a big thing if it's not taken care of. I thought Tommy cutting off his own pinky fingertip at the hospital was overkill as well. I mean, we get it. He's a busy guy and he's tough. I feel like he could have had a less serious injury to his hand and just got stitches or something, right? Easy peasy. I thought Billy Bob's monologue in the scene with Cooper at the hospital was absolutely fantastic. And in fact, Billy Bob had a few monologues in this episode that really, really hit. And look, Taylor's usually pretty good at writing conversational dialogue. That being said, there were a few lines where I was just like, I didn't like that. And look, you get that from time to time as nobody's perfect, right? But this episode had a few more of those than the last one did. And I'll just chalk that up to, like I said, reduced time for rewrites. Now, there was a bit more character development in this episode as we find out that Tommy is $500,000 in debt. And at the end of the episode, we find out that it's because Tommy had dreams of being an oil boss, like Monty, but that he failed due to what it seems to be lack of money. And remember the whole conversation with Ainsley about dreamers and losers and how Ainsley called Cooper a loser. And Tommy seemed to take that personally, like he was internalizing his own failures in the oil business. And so I think that's a really interesting part of his character to basically know that, Tommy, tried to be an oil man, couldn't make it work. It's $500,000 in debt. That maybe led to his divorce to Angela. And so you start to feel like maybe he really still loves Angela. And that could be something really interesting to explore. As now he's got his entire family save his ex-wife in Midland with him. I'm really interested to see kind of how that moves forward. Now, we can assume from the conversations we saw this episode between Angela and Tommy that maybe Tommy is more fit and attractive than Angela's second husband, Victor, is, and that maybe even the sex is better too, which would explain why Angela's always flirting with Tommy when she calls him. And I think it's interesting that all of Angela's calls are FaceTime calls, right? We never see them just voice call each other. But I absolutely think that Tommy and Angela are headed for some reunion sex at some point this season, and maybe even a total reconciliation by the end of this story, which I would totally be in favor of. I also feel like Ainsley may end up in Midland for longer than she thought, right? Than just the weekend. Because he keeps bringing up to people that she's only going to be there for a couple of days, which tells me that she's absolutely going to be there longer than a couple of days. Now, I got that from the conversation she had with her dad at the end of the episode. I don't know. Maybe, like I said, Angela and Victor split up for some reason, and then both she and Ainsley have to make the move to Midland for real. It also feels like Rebecca was sent to set Tommy up to take the fall for the deaths of Cooper's crewmen, and that maybe he and Monty are headed for a confrontation of sorts. You can tell that he has some disdain for Monty from the conversation he had with Cooper at the end of the episode, so we'll have to see how that plays out over the course of the season. There definitely needs to be an antagonist to Tommy's character, so we'll see if that's Monty or Rebecca, or hell, maybe it's a tag team effort and Tommy will need the support of his family to deal with it all as he starts to feel himself being pushed out of Monty's oil business. I could even see maybe a season or two from now wherein him and his son kind of tag team to make their own business, and the girls are kind of down for them, and it's like it turns into like a family thing. I think that would be a really cool way for this story to maybe end, but I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We're still in season 1 and only in the second episode of season 1, so we'll stick a pin in that for now. Now, overall, I'd give this episode a 75% or a 7.5 if you're thinking IMDb score. Like I said before, I thought this episode was a touch too long, and like I said, some of the dialogue I thought was a little suspect. Nothing huge, but it just was not as tight as the first episode. I also thought there were some character contradictions in this one. And Taylor needs to button it up before it becomes an issue, right? And that's even to say if he's even the writer of the episodes moving forward, because Taylor Sheridan has a nasty habit of writing the first, second, maybe even the third episode of a series and then kind of passing that off to some other person. And that's when the shows start to suffer, a la Mayor of Kingstown. Mayor of Kingstown started off really, really, really good. And it just, this past season just fell off. But it's largely because Taylor Sheridan is not writing those episodes anymore. Other people are. Other than that, I think the episode did what it was supposed to do. I think it moved the narrative forward with sufficient pace. That's always important. And it's making us care about the main characters a bit more than we did last episode, by giving us more information about them and leading us to the next episode where we'll get to learn even more. Now, 2 episodes in, I still see this show as appointment viewing, and I'm still impressed with the story and the writing overall. I think there's a good mix of characters that feel like real people and that have interesting connections to other characters in the story as well, setting up what I think could be some really interesting season arcs for said characters. And I'm already calling it, this show is going to get renewed for a second season. I'd almost be willing to bet my YouTube channel on that. I'm just hoping they can keep the main cast together and keep Taylor Sheridan interested in this and focused on this as much as he can, to get this really unique story to a satisfactory conclusion. But what do you guys think? Have you had a chance to watch the second episode of Landman yet? If you have, how did you think it compared to the pilot episode? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I greatly appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themascreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all in the next video.